Welcome to the Excellence at Work podcast, where we explore the strategies and best practices that drive business success. I'm Rachel Cooke, COO of Brandon Hall Group and the host of our podcast, along with members of our executive team. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest trends, insights, and real-world examples from some of the most exciting leaders from organizations worldwide. Be part of our journey and learn from the best as we discuss innovative approaches and cutting-edge technologies for talent management, learning and development, leadership, diversity and inclusion, and more.
All right, well, welcome. I am Mike Cooke, CEO of Brandon Hall Group. We have a very special guest today with us on our podcast. I want to welcome and introduce Bowen Moody. Bowen is the CEO of Verity, a BTS company. Very excited to talk about AI and sales and, of course, Verity. Let me pass it on to Bowen. Bowen, can you give us a brief overview of what you're doing with Verity, the acquisition of BTS, and some of the other interesting stories that you might have?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on the show, Mike. So I'm the CEO of Verity, an AI sales coaching product that was recently acquired by BTS. Prior to joining BTS, I had my own company building AI-driven sales training and coaching tools. And BTS just acquired us about 3 or 4 months ago. So for those of you who don't know what BTS does, it's one of the world's leading sales training and people consulting firms in the world. And they've acquired our services to help them to reinforce the training and see how they can support all that great in-person training they're doing with AI products for today's world.
I think that's fantastic. And I think the offering AI and sales coaching, that's big. And we've seen a lot of offerings, a lot of products around those areas. What's interesting, I think, about sales coaching is it's really difficult to coach sales reps on every single phone call that they have. I think I've seen some stats. It was probably from your company, actually, or maybe it was from us or a combination, where less than, I think, 1% of sales folks really get coaching after a sales call. And I think that's one of the problems or one of the opportunities that is here for Verity, just in terms of the evolution of sales coaching. You want to talk about some of the traditional challenges in sales coaching, just to acclimate our audience with that, and then also talk about going from a sales LMS to AI-powered coaching, because I think that's a great story of Verity.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I think sales coaching, or maybe just coaching in general, is one of those super important but rarely urgent things that managers should be doing. So I think if you speak to any manager out there, they would always say that coaching is an important part of their job, and probably one of the things that they enjoy doing the most. But it's also one of those things that it's one of the first things to get pushed when you've got a busy day. I think there's always things that are coming up, and it's rarely the most urgent thing on your to-do list. So I think when we speak to most managers, they want to be doing more here. Reps want more coaching, managers want to be doing more, but the reality is that it just always gets pushed because they don't have the time. So I think this is a great example of one of those things that AI can help with, those important but not urgent tasks that people have on their to-do list. In terms of the story of how we came up with the idea, I think it was a combination of two different things. First of all, I was experiencing this problem myself as running my own sales team. So prior to building Verity, then I was running, we had another sales training product. And we had a sales team of about 6 people that I was managing, and I just found that I never had time to coach them. So the sales team, each person in the sales team is probably doing 10 to 20 sales calls a week. So maybe 100 calls a week. And it's just impossible for me to join all of them. And I knew that when I hired everybody, we went through this extensive training to get them up to speed on our sales process. But I knew that they weren't following it on their sales calls. Whenever I joined, I was always a bit annoyed about the way the call went, and I found myself jumping in and they weren't quite taking the calls the way that I wanted. But yeah, it was just impossible for me to join all of the calls and to really know how they're executing at scale. Of course, when I was on the calls, people would change the way that they behaved and things like this. So I personally had this problem where I was trying to figure out, I was trying to understand what the team was doing and trying to figure out what the main areas for improvement for each person was, but I didn't have time to join the calls. And I think what was interesting is when I started speaking to some of our customers, I was just running a team of 6 salespeople, But when I spoke to our customers, some of them had 100 or even 1,000 sales reps, and these problems just got bigger and bigger the bigger the company you speak to. So you can imagine, some companies out there, they've got thousands of reps in the field. They do training with them, but they ultimately have no idea how people are really behaving once they're out on those calls. It doesn't matter how good the training is. It's, at the end of the day, how people are executing the field can be completely different to what you expect. So I think that was where we really saw the opportunity for building this AI sales coach, was to solve this problem. The second insight we had, I mentioned before that there was two. We were already building sales training products in this space. So we were working with the idea, we had a sales LMS that was using CRM data to identify gaps that reps had, recommend trainings to people, and then measure the impact of the training on the CRM data. And we found we're having quite a few challenges with CRM data in that it was never up to date. And a lot of our customers were asking us to see if we could pull more insights out of the calls. So many of our customers were already recording their sales calls, and they knew the data was sitting in there, but they didn't have a good way of extracting it. So when generative AI was released, beginning of last year, then we saw this opportunity to solve this problem, this personal pain point that I had, and also the limitations we had with our own product, by inventing this AI sales coach. So yeah, we built the product last year. I think we were the first company in the world to launch an AI sales coach. There's been a few others that have popped up since then, and we had some really good results last year. So when BTS heard about it, then they wanted to jump on board and decided to acquire us.
Yeah, no, I think it's almost a marriage made in heaven. Potentially, the market potential is absolutely huge, as we know. Talk to me about the experience. So let's say I'm in sales and I'm on my 10, 20, 30 sales calls, a week on the phone, of course. What's the user experience like for me? How does that work?
Yeah, so the way it works is that it integrates with calling tools like Microsoft Teams, Zoom. We can also do the cold calling tools, so tools like RingCentral, etc. The way it works is that we will record all of the calls, transcribe them into text, and then we analyze the text to provide feedback. So then once we've analyzed the text, the coach acts similar to what a real human manager would do. It can go through and score the call against a playbook that you upload, and give feedback around what were the main strengths and weaknesses the rep had on the call. So it'll give that feedback to the rep instantly after the call finishes, and then aggregate the data up across all the calls for the management team, so they can see what are the consistent strengths and weaknesses that people have on all of their calls.
Right. I think that consistency part is really important, because when you outlined it very well. When there's hundreds, if not thousands, of sales folks, being able to coach, number one, that's very challenging. Also, when you have a variety of different sales leaders managing hundreds, if not thousands, of salespeople, the consistency of the coaching is a challenge. I don't care how good of a sales organization you are. So the opportunities in AI, I think you're going to see more consistency and the objectivity and the the feedback. I'm not quite sure how it works with that, but I would imagine that would be a big benefit of using Verity.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what we see in most companies is that people get promoted to a manager because they're a great seller. So they're good at sales, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're a good manager or a good coach. And I think the difference in coaching we see across organizations. Take this example of 1,000 sales rep, hundreds of managers. You're going to have some amazing coaches in that group, but you're also going to have some really poor ones. People that don't do it at all, they don't have the time, or those that are trying but they don't necessarily have the skills. And I think a big benefit of AI coaching is not necessarily to replace the managers. I think they should still be coaching their reps. Yes. It's about making sure that everyone has access to quality feedback, so the reps can get this directly. But it's also providing guidance to the managers on what they should be focusing on. So if you can imagine a manager, if they were going to sit down and do a proper call coaching session with their rep, they probably need to listen to 5 different calls to figure out. If you just listen to one call, you don't know, is that a good call or a bad call? You're kind of just guessing. Yeah. You probably need to listen to 5 calls to try and figure out what are the consistent strengths and weaknesses. And then you're going to go into that coaching session. And if you're a bad manager, you'll probably nitpick on 1,000 different details. If you're a good one, you're probably trying to find what is that one thing they need to focus on. Yes. And that's where the AI coach can come in. It can really help, is helping the managers to prepare for those coaching sessions by listening to all the calls, not just 5, but the 20 or 30 that they've had that week, and analyzing the trends to see what is that one thing, and providing a structure. Providing a structure for the manager that they can follow so they can have a really constructive coaching conversation.
So what types of data and insights would go to a sales leader or a sales manager for them to be able to coach and meet with their sales reps after they get the AI coaching, right?
So for each rep we provide a coaching report. So you can toggle the time. You can look across different time periods. So you can look at all the calls that the sales rep's done that week, that month, that year, and you can aggregate the data up and see what is the consistent strengths and weaknesses they've had. And once we identify an area for improvement, we will also link to specific examples from the calls. So I think this is super important in getting buy-in from the reps and the managers. I think people are still a bit skeptical about AI. So super important that if you make a statement that there's an area to improve, especially when it's something potentially an area for improvement for someone, they can be quite defensive about this. So it's super important that you back the data up by being able to link to specific calls where the sales rep might have made this mistake, and the specific point in that call. So so for every single rep, we'll provide this overview. We'll point out what we think they need to improve, and then we'll give them examples that they can then check for themselves. So again, we're not looking to replace the role of the manager. I mean, the sales rep can access all this data and they can coach themselves if they want. But where we see the biggest improvements is when the manager's involved, and they're helping the rep to understand that, unpack it, and make it relevant. But I think it just saves the managers a ton of time preparing for those calls, so they can have a much more structured and a much more effective conversation with their team members.
Right. And this can be used in a variety of different ways too, I would imagine. So like a first call, or what may be called a discovery call, a fourth follow-up sales meeting. It may last 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then calls towards getting some level of commitment or agreement from the prospect. How does that work? Like, how would a manager or a VP of sales or a chief revenue officer leverage this in their entire sales organization for those scenarios?
Yeah, so what the coach does is, part of what it does is it identifies the type of call that you're having. So it will separate whether it's a cold call, a discovery call, a demo, a negotiation. It identifies the type of call that is, and it applies the right playbook or the right framework to analyze that call. So we have a bunch of playbooks that come off the shelf for analyzing these. We have our own skills and frameworks that you can use, but pretty much all of our customers, all of our paying customers, customize those playbooks. So I think most of our customers have some sort of methodology or playbook. They might base it on consultative selling or solution selling or spin or whatever. But then they all tweak those methodologies for their own business. Everyone's product, industry, etc. is different. So they usually take one of these base methodologies that we have, and then they tweak it to fit their own business, and customize it for that. And I think that's a super important part of the.
I think it's one of the most important parts. We spoke about this, last week on a phone call, on a meeting, and we talked about spin selling and all the different. First we started talking about playbooks, and then it's really sales methodologies, whether it's solution selling, spin selling, impact, go down the list. So I think that's really important. That's like one of the first questions I think a buyer or a chief revenue officer, sales officer is going to ask is, can it integrate with our existing process, whether it's unique or if it's a methodology that they already have in place, which most likely they generally do at that level. So I think that's really important. How do you what about tracking? Like, is there a way to track progress with this? I know it's driving a lot of behavior change, and I think it's really cool, like getting coaching from an AI tool. I get coaching from our note taker, read.ai, and others, certainly. But with tracking progress with this, how do you track progress with Verity? What types of things are you tracking progress with?
Yeah, so this is I mentioned before that we're aggregating all the data, right? So we're aggregating the data on an individual rep level. So you can see on their profile page, what are the main areas for improvement and how is that changing over time? And then we also provide dashboards for each of the team managers and for the organization leaders, where they can see how things are progressing over time. So I think what the way that this works is that if you're a manager and you've got 10 reps in your team, you could be looking at this dashboard view, and you could be instantly see who was doing the best job, who was following the playbook the most closely, and who's the person that isn't, so that you can spend more time with those people that are struggling, and then you can actually track those improvements over time. I think that's been a big missing piece of the puzzle for any coaching that people are doing. Usually you'll have that coaching conversation. Even the best coaches in the world will have a conversation. They'll identify an area, they'll make commitments on what they're going to do to improve, but then does that actually change 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 months, 6 months later? I don't think anyone really knows. And I think this is also a big area where AI can have a massive impact, is that because you'd have to be such a diligent person to be tracking this with a pen and paper or putting it in an Excel spreadsheet.
Yes.
I mean, I don't know anyone that has that level of discipline, right? And I think this is where again, using AI to automate these boring tasks is important, but not urgent. Some of these boring things, I think this is a great thing you can outsource to AI.
Yeah, no, I mean, I look at the overall market for this, and coaching overall has been kind of a cottage industry globally, but with the advent of AI and these systems that are coming into play, I think it's going to be a very big opportunity for companies to improve, and those that provide it, obviously a big opportunity, certainly. So, when you go into an account, and right now I'm not sure of Verity's sales process, but do you see a lot of people coming to you asking for help with this, or do you see a lot of it more educating the market right now?
A bit of both. So I think this is also part of why we decided to work with BTS. There's what we found is there's just a natural fit with sales consulting firms such as BTS when they do a big piece of change management work with a company. They introduce a new methodology or a new playbook to a company. They spend sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars training people on this new playbook.
Yes.
And then what happens after that? And I think this is the area that in the training industry, in the L&D industry, this has always been the big question mark. I think it doesn't matter how good you can run amazing training programs, you can run certifications, you can do tests and all sorts of things, but then what happens in terms of do people actually change behavior once they go out in the field? And I think that's been the big question, and that's where we see the biggest opportunities, working with companies like BTS to help them reinforce and measure the impact of those trainings. And I think this is so good for us, because what we found as a startup is we were as it's challenge. I think everyone who works in L&D and training would understand this, that a big part of what you do is trying to find companies that care, or that I mean, excuse the language, but give a shit in the first place. And if you take a sample of 1,000 companies, maybe 50% of them care enough to give proper training, and then you can focus on them. And I think that's a challenge for a startup in this industry. Whereas what's great about working with BTS is that they've already found those companies that are interested in training people, driving change. And then I think we can focus on delivering the best product to those companies that care, rather than trying to figure out who they are.
Yes. I mean, good point. You remind me, like, the reinforcement piece of this is really important. I won't give names, but we work with a very high level, senior level executive at a major Fortune 200 organization, and they spent millions of dollars on a sales methodology, a traditional sales methodology. There's nothing wrong with the methodology, nothing wrong with the coaches and the trainers and all the people that sold the deal and got the deal done and are now like engaged with them. But the biggest thing is the reinforcement piece. Like, everybody gets excited first. We're getting training, and then the first month or 2 months goes by, and then life goes on, right? Business goes on. You don't have the same level of reinforcement. So, long story short, this company has spent millions of dollars on a great sales methodology, but there's not the consistent reinforcement that needs to go on day in and day out. Unfortunately, a lot of sales training happens. It's more of an event where it needs to be a journey, right? And we all struggle with the same things, whether you're a smaller organization or a Fortune 500 organization. Learning is like one of the most important things you can do now as a leader. I don't care if you're working in HR and learning. I don't care if you're a CEO of a company. You have got to take a look at your learning and, of course, talent as well. But it all goes hand in hand. So that's one of the opportunities I see with this, being able to track data, make managers better, give them more tools to work with so they can do their jobs better. Saves them a lot of time, like you said. And getting that level of consistency and consistent reinforcement, I think, is really, really super important. But taking a scenario like the one I just gave, and you have a big Fortune 500 company, they've already spent millions on a sales coaching methodology or sales methodology, and they've done it before, right? Because most big companies have been around for many, many years, if not decades and decades. But what should you be thinking about or considering if you're that senior leader that, say, we're working with? When should they start to consider an AI coaching solution, right? When things just have not necessarily worked. Besides now, of course, right? That's the obvious answer. But what would you say to that?
Yeah, I think it's around this. When you have a major initiative where you really want to drive behavior change afterwards. I mean, at the moment, that's just a black box. I mean, the way most companies are doing it is they'll run these big training events in person or digital or whatever it might be. They'll certify everybody, and then if you're in a sales team, they might send out a survey afterwards a couple of weeks later, and then maybe they look at the CRM data 6 months later to see if anything changed. And I mean, but there's this big, even if the data goes up or down, I mean, we saw this when we had the LMS, even if the data goes up by 10%, you can never attribute how much of that is actually a result of the training, or was it just seasonality or whatever. Like the behavior change component is just a complete black box in here. So I think for any L&D professional, anyone that needs to make sure that you're actually driving behavior change, for anyone, if you're in L&D and you need to actually track, as part of your job, you need to prove that what you're doing has had an impact.
Yes.
I think this is also important. But yeah, I mean, from my perspective and the sales process, like the most promising sales calls I have are usually actually with heads of sales, CROs, VPs of sales who they've rolled out a big initiative, and then I speak to them 6 months later and nothing's changed, and they're pulling their hair out. They're super frustrated. They don't know what to do because they've made this big investment and it feels like a waste of money. And I think that's, usually it requires the hindsight of making that mistake and feeling that pain when we speak to them. But yeah, as much as possible, as I said, working with companies like BTS, we want to get in before that problem happens. We want to try and reinforce it immediately afterwards and make sure it sticks. So we're not having that conversation 6 months later where nothing has changed.
Makes a lot of sense. What can you tell us about the integration with BTS's existing offerings in programs? Like, how are you planning to roll that out? That's going to be really interesting, I think, to not just myself, but to the overall market that's really looking at this.
So yeah, I think exactly what we've been talking about. I think the biggest area we can support BTS is on that follow-up post session. I think they do amazing strategy work defining the right playbooks and the right defining what is needed for the business. They actually have, in the sales organization, they have this framework: define great, assess great, experience great, and then execute great. And I think they're amazing at defining, assessing, and experiencing, doing amazing trainings to experience the training. But then it's that follow-up and what happens once they've finished the training and they're out in the field that nobody is good at. I mean, it's not just them. Trust me, I've spoken to most of the sales training companies out there in the last year, and they all have the same problem. So I think this is the biggest opportunity is to follow up after the training. And again, it just hasn't been possible before. I mean, BTS, I know that the way that they would do this, they would do surveys post-training. They would also offer human coaches to go out and do role plays with people and follow-up sessions with people, but it's just not affordable, right? You can't pay a consultant day rates to go out and have one-on-one coaching sessions every week with sales reps. Even if you could, I think there's two costs to this. There's a cost associated with paying a consulting firm to do that, or building your in-house training and coaching team. But there's also a hidden cost around taking people away from their job to do these sessions as well. So, and that's probably even a bigger cost. Like what's sitting, the tip of the iceberg is probably the upfront money they're paying. The bigger cost is taking people out of sales calls and putting them in coaching training sessions and stuff like this. So again, now with generative AI and with this week, for the first time, we can really start to do this at scale. I mean, now a coaching conversation probably works out to cost us somewhere around 10 to 20 cents. But if you pay a consultant, it's probably going to be several $100 or something. It's just the scale you can reach now. It just wasn't possible even 2 years ago.
No, and that's the challenge, right? Taking your sales force out for a week or even 2 or 3 days. My old sales manager used to say, Mike, nothing happens until somebody sells something. And that's still so true today. So I understand what you're saying. What about, I always love looking at these systems and different technologies coming out, and usually they're for specific silo within an organization, whether it's for talent or selecting talent or recruiting or learning, sales, of course. So what do you see as the growth potentially of this platform? Because you already have the technology. Do you see it expanding beyond sales? And you don't have to answer if that's confidential, but I'm just curious.
Yeah, for sure. So no, it's not confidential. BTS, I mean, they do sales training, but they also do leadership training. And I think this is actually the core of their business. So, when we look at the conversation we're having with BTS is we have this technology, we've proven it with sales teams, and now we're looking at how can we expand this across other types of conversations. So, the way that we're really looking to reposition the product is not just sales coaching, but conversation coaching. So it could be any conversation that you're having. It could be sales calls. It could be leadership calls. It could be coaching the coach. So coaching the person in their team. It could also be executive level coaching, helping executives to prepare for, board presentations, helping to prepare for big pitches. Again, I think one insight we saw is that, executives, CEOs, executive level leadership, before a big board presentation, they'll often prepare that presentation and practice dozens of times beforehand. But they're very, very sensitive to getting feedback from people, and they really want to do it in their own space.
They do,
so,
always. Yeah.
So providing a place where they can practice this and they can get feedback and spar with an AI coach, this is an area that could be quite a big area for us as well. So we're expanding. We're looking at a lot of different use cases. Another area we're looking into is not just live coaching conversations, but we're also exploring bots, role play bots. We're having a conversation now with a customer where they're going to load all of their data they have on customer up into the system, and we're going to create a bot where sales reps can practice pitches and conversations for big pitches, major pitches, with a bot that's trained on real customer data and acts like a real customer on those calls. So there's a lot of different opportunities here. And I think for us, it's about really prioritizing. Now we're a part of the BTS family. We have access to the biggest companies in the world, and I think it's really about prioritizing what is the biggest, the highest impact problems we can solve for them.
No, I think it's really exciting. We didn't get to talk about it much last week, but what was your first sale of this to? I'm just curious. What was the first company you sold to? I don't need the name, but just the scenario, because that's always fun. I go back with starting up different companies, and you always kind of remember your first sale, right?
Yeah. So for us, it was a bit easier to get going because we already had a sales training product. So as I mentioned before, we already had a bunch of customers who were asking us for this product before we built it, and that's the best situation to be in. Yes. So we already, before we even wrote a line of code, we came up with the concept, and we went back to the customers who'd asked us, and we basically co-developed it with those customers hand in hand. So I think compared to when I built my first company, first startup, and doing everything from scratch, that was a dream to already have a pool of existing customers. And again, feeling like this was getting pulled. I mean, there was already, this need was always there, but there just wasn't the technology to solve it. So I think, as a founder, I think that's the dream scenario. And I think that also, it just shows that once you're in a space, you're just so much better positioned to take advantage of these opportunities when they come up. I mean, it was because we were already working in this space, we're already talking about these problems, that when an opportunity, technology like this comes up, you can just be so much faster to execute on it.
Oh,
Than
it's incredible the skill you get. We worked with a company probably 7, 8 years ago that they're very successful, 20, maybe 25 sales folks, but they got acquired by a company, and that company had 800 sales reps. So imagine going from 25 sales folks being able to make 1 or 2 calls every hour or two to 800, and the feedback you get as a manager, as an executive team, the skill is just enormous. So I'm really excited to see where you go with this. I think it's going to be a wonderful opportunity for BTS, an incredible opportunity for you and Verity, of course, and everything that you built. So I'm excited for you. I think it's wonderful. Before we go, any final thoughts on the future of sales performance improvement or anything else, Bowen?
No, maybe just to double down on what you said, I can just echo what you said, that this is just the beginning. I mean, I think what we can do today versus what what is going to be possible in 6 months, a year, 2 years. I mean, again, I think that the models are just getting going, right? And I think every time new models get released, there's new capabilities. So I'm just super excited to work here and see where it goes. And I think the key for anyone else that's interested in this space is just to be working at the cutting edge. And again, you'll be best placed to see where the opportunities are if you're already sort of at the forefront. I think you just need to be working with the models and be adaptable as new opportunities come up.
Well, sounds like that's excellence at work right there. With that, let's sign off. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks.